This time I'm going to show you how to make this little crossbody bag with a slider, so you can make that strap as long or as short as you want it to, and it's got an inside pocket as well, and it's just big enough to fit things like my mobile phone in there, maybe some dog treats. It's got an inside pocket inside as well, which I could have divided up to make into a pen pocket, but I don't know about you, but when I go out walking the dog, I like to take my phone. I like to take some loose change. I may take some sweets, but I'll always take some treats for Bobbin as well, so that if she's a good girl, she actually likes a bit of cheese, so she gets spoilt when she's out, but it means she's a very well behaved dog. But I like to be hands-free as well, so I like to have one hand with the lead. I like to have my other hand to hold on to the fence as I'm climbing over a stile. So a crossbody bag of this kind of size is perfect for something like that. Or if you're travelling and you just wanted something to keep your documents or your passport and some change and things like that. The occasions where you're out and about, you want to be hands-free, but you don't need everything that you normally carry in your big bag. I think this is going to be absolutely perfect. Now, I've made this from cotton. So I've got the zebra print cotton on the outside and fastens with a magnetic snap, and I've just got a bright red on the inside because I thought it really set it off. But equally, you could make this from I'd say a softer fabric, so a super soft faux leather would work really well. Something like denim would be absolutely ideal. Firmer fabrics like cork, maybe a little bit more tricky to work with, not impossible, but I'd stick, because it's a smaller bag, I'd stick it to something quite soft and quite easy to work with. I left the materials and your cutting instructions in the description box underneath the video, so you may need to click on where it says view more or see more to expand that a little bit, and that'll give you all of the requirements and your materials list as well. So I think that's enough chat. I think it's about time we started sewing. Here we go. So first of all, here are all of my ingredients. So this is the strap, and then I've got the two pieces of fabric which are the strap tabs. Those go on each side of the bag with a D-ring, a slider and my magnetic snaps. That's my hardware. I'm going to have a pocket in lining fabric on the inside, so I've got two pieces of fabric here. This is going to be the back and the front of the pouch, and this is the flap, and then I have the gusset. Now, apart from the strap and the tabs, I've put H630 fusible fleece on the wrong side of all of the outer pieces, including the gusset. Not necessarily on the lining, not necessarily on the pocket. So let's start off by making up the pocket first of all. Now, I am going to round the bottom of the outer pieces, so we can do that at this point. So if you take a circle template such as a ribbon reel, and this one measures 3 inches across, but the way I said earlier that I've actually made this is so that if you don't have exactly the same size circle template as I have, you're still going to be able to get a perfectly fitting gusset. Okay, so I'm just drawing a curve around the bottom two edges of the lining fabric first of all, and then let's cut those off. And the same on this side. Then I'm going to use this as a template to round off the outer pieces as well, so they're all the same size. 1 and 2, and the same on the second side. So they're all exactly the same shape. So 2 lining pieces and 2 outer pieces with the rounded bases. On the lining is where the pocket's going to go, so we'll do that first of all. So I'm going to take the 2 pocket pieces and sew these across the top. Now, if you have a fabric with a right and a wrong side, this is right sides together. This fabric is the same on both sides, so it doesn't really matter. So we'll stitch straight across the top with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, or 6mm seam allowance. Then I'm going to turn this back, and this is a nice crisp fabric actually, so I don't need to iron it at this point. I'm going to fold it so that the seam sits right on the top, and then just edge stitch close to the seam. So that's the top of the pocket. For the bottom of the pocket, let's fold this back over again so that the two long edges are meeting, and we'll sew those together to make a tube. And then let's turn this through to the right side, and this time I will give it a press. This is in turn going to go over one side of the pocket piece, just before we get to the curved base section. That's the neater side. I'll pop a couple of pins in here to hold it in place. Then I'm going to top stitch across the bottom, and just at the top here within the seam allowance to secure the top. And let's give that, oh, that's not quite straight, that's better. I'll give that a quick measure. That is 1.5 inches from the top, and I'm just looking for my tape measure to give you that in centimetres as well. So 1.5 inches is 4 centimetres from the top. So straight across the bottom, and then just at the side, just to hold it together so we can take the pins out. Now if you wanted to sew a dividing line down the centre, that would be fine. So you could make pen pockets by sewing down here, or even making that into 3. I'm going to leave mine as 1 pocket because I'm kind of thinking I might want to put my phone inside there, or my keys or something like that. Right, let's sew these together. So let's have the long gusset piece, and I'm simply going to pin this and then sew it around the edge. So I know I'm using very long pins, but I do prefer to use these kind of pins. This will be too long, and I've deliberately done that. I touched on it earlier on, because if your circle shape here isn't exactly the same size as mine, if it's slightly more rounded, then this needs to be longer. If you've got more of a curve here, then that needs to be shorter. So I've deliberately made that a bit long. Just as I'm coming up to the curve here, I'm going to snip very slightly by about 1/8 of an inch or a couple of millimeters into the fabric, and that will allow it to bend around the curve a lot easier. So match up the edges as you go around here, because we want to keep that nice and neat. Could have had smaller pins. Around the side, and I'm not going to chop the extra off at the moment. I'll do that when I've finished the lining. So again, coming up to the curve, tiny snips. We don't want to be cutting into where we're actually going to be stitching. So keep bending it around. That was a bit bent. And you can see mine is about 1 inch or a couple of centimetres too long. That is absolutely fine. We're not following an exact pattern here. And then we'll sew all the way around these bottom 3 sides. And just take the pins out as you sew. When you come to the curve section, again, be careful around here. So it'd be nice not to have any puckers or little creases in your fabric. And just keep making sure that the edges of the fabric are lined up as you take the pins out. So gently again around the curve. This is more important on the outside of the bag, because that's obviously going to be seen a lot more. Now I can see where the curve's going to be here on when I sew in the opposite side. So again, I'm just going to snip into that area. It's some nice sharp scissors that are sharp up to the point. Not all scissors are the same. These are fantastic. Right, and then starting from the shorter side, we're going to pin the second half of the lining right sides together. This time we'll need to leave a turning gap. So I'm going to do that in the opposite side here. So again, just lining up those edges. Try not to stretch anything, particularly as you go around the curve, because if you've cut your fabric on a curve, you're going to have some of that is at a 45-degree angle, so you could stretch it. Let's go from this side. And we don't want that. Okay, a few more pins. Just coming up to the second curve here. I must throw away the bent pin, that's no use to anybody, is it? That'll do. And then as before, I'll just sew around those bottom three sides. Then when I come to the end, I can simply snip off that extra little bit of gusset fabric. So that's my lining section finished with a turning gap in one side. So next, let's make up the flap. And again, because I think the bottom of the bag is curved, it's quite nice to have the flap to echo that same shape. So I have the lining and the outer fabric lined up here. And just like we did with the base of the bag, I'm using the same shape of circle template to draw around. And let's cut this out. Before we sew this together, I'm going to fit one half of the magnetic snap, which I seem to have lost, here we go, the thinner part of the snap, to the lining fabric. So I'm just going to mark a little crease here, and I'm going to put a scrap of fabric, and it doesn't really matter what this is, interfacing would work really well, just over the back of where my magnetic snap's going to go, just to strengthen that a little bit. So because this is going to pull on the flap as you're opening and closing. So this will help to stop it stretching or pulling against the fabric. So that's on the wrong side if you have a right and wrong side. I'm going to make a mark 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres from the edge of the fabric. I've done a lot of these, I can do that by eye, but measure that if you wish, through the centre of the back of the snap, and a little line along each side like so. Then I'm simply going to fold in half and make a tiny snip. Make it a small one, you can always make a small hole bigger. And then push the prongs of the snap through those holes, pop on the back, and squish the prongs open. Then we'll pop these right sides together right sides together. A couple of pins. And I'm going to sew all the way around the edge, but leave the top open. And careful as you go around the curve, because this is forming the shape of the flap, and that's going to be quite noticeable if you've got any wobbly stitches or any pointy bits on the curves. So again, take your time, and then on the home run, then out come the pins, and I'm going to trim the seam allowance away just to cut down on the bulk of the fabric around the curves, like so. And we'll turn this the right side out and press it. Depending on the type of fabric you use, you may want to avoid pressing over the magnetic snap, because sometimes it can show through a little. Tell you what would be quite nice as well. If you're very careful, you can roll the fabric just to expose a little bit of the lining. If you've got a nice contrast like I have with the red, you're not going to see that unless you actually open up the bag. But it's not going to make much of a difference to the shape or the size of the flap if you just roll it slightly, so there's just a tiny amount of the lining showing through. Don't roll it too much, else it'll be quite misshapen. And I'm just going to encourage that to stay there with a little bit of best press. Or a spray starch would work as well. So it's only subtle. I'm not distorting the shape, but I'm just easing that back very, very slightly, so you get a little touch of red showing through all the way around. And let's move that out of the way. Then I'm going to top stitch around these three sides. And again, this is going to be quite noticeable, so take your time with it. Carefully around the curve. There we go. This is why we had that magnetic snap an inch or 2.5 centimetres away from the edge, so that I don't have to manoeuvre my presser foot around it. But if you do get a little bit close with it, then just put your zipper foot on your machine. And that's the flap finished. I'm going to put the second half of that magnetic snap onto the front of the bag. And at this point, I'm going to measure where it's going to go, so I know it's in exactly the right place. Now the sides of my bag are going to be 1 inch wide when I've taken off the seam allowance. So I want the flap to bend over by about 1¼ inches. And I'll do that in centimetres in just a second. So let's measure 1½ to be safe, which is 4 centimetres. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm central and make a mark here where the second part of the flap's going to be. And I'm just going to measure that to make sure that it is exactly in the centre. So that's 6 inches wide. I'm exactly on the 3 inch mark, so slap bang in the centre. So let's take, like we did before, the back of the magnetic snap. I know you can't see the mark very well because I've used a black pen, but I can see it fine. Mark each side here. And like before, I'm just going to fold that over and make tiny snips each side. And then the fatter part, which is the magnet side of the snap, put that on. Pop the back on and squish. Right, let's put this together now. So just in the same way as I did with the front, with the lining, I'm going to start at one side and pin. when I come up to, again, where the curve is, little snips into the seam allowance. And again, it kind of allows the fabric to spread open as you go around the curve. So exactly the same as with the lining, we'll do this with the front and the back. But of course this time we don't need to leave a turning gap in the side. And just like before, this is going to be a little bit too long, so let's snip it off. Then we'll turn this the right side out. Now at this point you can check that the curves are nice and curvy, that nothing's twisted, that you don't have any little pleats or tucks around the bottom, because at this point you can always unpick it, or you can always sew back over again if you're not happy with the way that it's looking. Let's take the flap, and we're going to sew this with the popper facing upwards to the centre of the back, and that should fit just nice and snugly, matching up to the side seams here. So this is just going to be, so I just can't find my pins, sewn quite close to the edge, so within the seam allowance. This is just, it's like a tacking stitch or a basting stitch, just to hold that in place. I can lengthen the stitch there a little bit. If you have a free arm on your sewing machine, then it might be a good time to use it. Otherwise, just sew from the inside like so. So pins out, and at this point we can double check that when we fold this over, I've got that perfect fit, and it's not too tight, so it allows the flap to sit over the sides of the bag. And we're going to make up the strap. Whoops. So pressing mat at the ready. So these are the little tabs. I'm going to put D-rings on both sides. You don't need D-rings on both sides, only on the one, but I think it looks more balanced when you have them on the two. So these are the tabs that are going to hold the D-rings in place. So as I'm not using any fusible fleece on this one, the 4 layers of fabric I think are going to be quite enough. I don't think they need any kind of interfacing, but if you do have a very fine fabric, you might want to use a medium or a lightweight interfacing. So all I'm doing, as you can see, is folding these in half. They are too long again, prefer that, and fold the sides to the centre and then in half again. Then I'm going to sew along each side in just a second. Meanwhile, let's do the same with the long strap. Now it is quite a long strap, so it's long enough for me to be a crossbody, but if you're making this for yourself, it may be an idea to actually measure exactly where you want this to go. So if it's just going to go over your shoulder, you may not want it as long as if you're going to have it as a crossbody. But it is an adjustable strap because it has the slider on it, so you can make it shorter, but if it's longer you want it, then you need to add a little bit more fabric on the end of the strip. So again, just like with the tabs, folding the long sides together so I can crease the centre, and then each long side to the centre, and then in half again. So let's start with the tabs, and again I'm just going to sew along each long side. You're not going to see the ends of these because they will disappear into the seam allowance. You will see the ends of the strap, the long strap, so I'll show you in a second how to make those look really neat. You could use more rows of stitches, or maybe even a decorative stitch on your sewing machine for the straps if you wish. Okay, so that's the 2 little tabs. Again, I'll cut those down to size in just a second. with the long strap, because we're going to see the end, I'm going to fold this back on itself. Let me put this somewhere where you can actually see it. So fold that back over. So I've exposed the two raw edges, and I'm going to sew straight across the end here. Sorry, just went a little bit wonky there. So I'm not going to trim off the ends. I'm just going to press that in and turn it over. So I've got a seam right on the end there. And just looking for my turning tool. Oh, things are never where you leave them. Let's use some tweezers instead to just push out that corner. Let me show you up here, because that might be a little bit easier. So that's where I've folded it. So turn this back on itself so that the raw edges are all exposed here, and sew straight across the top. Like so, and then turn it back out the right way and just poke out that corner. If you see any of this bit on the inside poking out, you can kind of snip that off. Those are fine, you don't see those. So this time I'm going to sew all the way around all sides. And just snip off that loose thread on the end. Right, so we can put the long strap to one side for the moment. Let's take our outside bag again, and I'm going to fold these tabs in half and thread them through one of the tabs, one of the rectangle rings, sorry. And oh look, that's come undone at the end. I just need to re-sew that little bit back up again. I must have put a little bit of strain on that when I was fitting the flap to the back. Right. So I'm going to trim these down a bit because I do think they're a bit too long. So I'm going to cut, say ½ an inch, 1.2 centimetres off the end, and then these are going to go either side facing downwards, so they again should sit nice and neatly just inside the seam of the gusset. So again, let's thread this one through, cut a little bit down. It also kind of gets rid of any of this messy bit that you sometimes get when you start sewing right on the edge of your fabric. So you've got a nice neat edge there. Right side in and pop up in, and we'll sew straight across within the seam allowance again, just to hold those in place. And again, free arm might be an idea on your sewing machine. Whisk it around to this side, and so. Now that's everything that we need to do on the outside of the bag. So with the outside of the bag, the right side out, and the lining inside out, and with the pocket, I want that to be at the back. I'm going to pop the outer bag inside the lining, Make sure the flap is inside and those tabs are facing downwards. So I don't want those on the outside of the bag. And then match up the seams. You need to go down. And we're going to sew all the way around the top. Pin if you wish. I'm going to this time use the free arm on my machine. So let's slip this over the edge. Just fit nice and snugly. And we'll sew all the way around. Be careful when you get to the tabs. You've got a lot of fabric there, so it may slow your machine down a little bit. You may have to give it a bit of a push like I do with mine. Again, let's just keep spinning this around. Just coming up to the second tab here. And back to the beginning. And then we can turn the whole thing through the right side out. Now we turn the turning gap close. So I'm just pulling the edges of the gap away from each other, and the edge of the fabric just folds in automatically. And I'm just going to sew this on my sewing machine. I'd normally change the colour of the thread to the same colour, but for speed I'll just keep it white. I think we'll give that another press, just a second. Let's push the lining inside the bag, right into the curves, and we'll press it. And inside, so that the seam's sitting right on the top. In fact, we could do that rolling the top over slightly again, just to add that little flash of red across the top of the bag. Press over the sides. Let's just give this a crease. And maybe press a little bit around the seams as well to make it a little bit more boxy shaped. So I'm just pinching the fabric so that the seam's right on the edge, and just giving that a press, and that helps it to keep its shape. I think that'll be fine. Now, to make this really neat, I'm going to cut off loose threads, and then I'm going to top stitch all the way around. So I've still got the free arm on my sewing machine. I like to stop somewhere where you're not really going to see the join of stitching, so maybe just at the side of the flap at the back. Over you go. That seems to be caught on something. Oh, that isn't. Okay. There we go. So long stitch again because it's top stitch. Careful over the tabs and the flap because it is quite thick. And top stitching again, you can see this, so nice straight lines. A little bit of encouragement over the thicker fabric. Just underneath the seam where the flap is, I'm just pulling that away from the stitch line and back to the beginning. And there's a thread. So let's put on the long strap. So first of all, I'll put that back on there again. Take your slider. Oh no, we're going to go through here first. So through one side of the D-ring, doesn't matter which side it is, and out of the other side. and then fold this over by about 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres, so that when you're sewing across here, you're going to clear the rectangle ring on your sewing machine, and the seam is on the inside. So I'm not going to sew in a box, I'm just going to sew straight across the existing seam line here and go backwards. If you want to sew in a box to make it really strong, then that's fine, but I think we're okay just going backwards and forwards a few times. So again, seams on the inside, nice and flush on the outside. Trim off your bits. Then this side of the strap, we're going to take into one side of the slider, out the other side, making sure the strap isn't twisted. We're now going to take this end through the rectangle ring remaining, and then back through the slider. Now the easiest way to do this is to actually push the fabric away from that centre bar. This one moves, some of them don't, you know, they do look different depending what style you've got. Then I'm going to, let's just make that a little bit longer. So I've got a loop of fabric at the back of the slider, and now I can thread this under that bar, fold it back over to come out of the top of the bar, and when I pull the fabric through, it's nice and secure. This is then going to fold over, and we need to sew it to that part of the loop. Shall I do that all over again? So let's move the slider out of the way. We'll take this end through the bottom piece here. Then we want to go underneath that bar. So push the fabric out of the way so I can actually get to the bar. So make a loop at the back. Take the end, push it under the bar, and then fold it around to come out of the top. You could use tweezers here if that helps, so just push that through. And then this part needs to fold over, and we're going to sew it on here. So let's move all of this out of the way and just sew it to the bottom of the loop. So again, I'm not going to do a box. I'm going to go across 3 times. The zigzag stitch should make it nice and sturdy as well, actually. Snip that off. And there's my little bag finished. So your slider, again, you can move that up and down. So you can make that as long or as short as you want it to be. And plenty of room inside here for things like my mobile phone, my dog treats, a little bit of stationery, some loose change, a bag of sweets, whatever it is you like to take out with you. But it's a nice compact size if you don't want to carry a big bag around with you. It's a nice size as well if you wanted a really secure bag, if you are maybe you're travelling and you wanted to hide this inside a jacket so you can wear it across your body, but it's not too bulky that you couldn't fasten your jacket still. So it makes a nice secure bag if you've got change or your passport and things like that in there as well. So I hope you enjoyed it. I think it's a bag for anybody and everybody, and it's quite simple to make, but I think it looks really professional as well. And best of all, I think it's going to be a really useful bag for you. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I shall see you next time. Bye bye.